Am I under arrest or something?
Should you be?
For someone who's not a drinker, Jules makes a real go of it after her failed attempt to follow George's clues into the water at the end of the last episode. Walker will identify this response as her wanting to run away, which is something that is easier said than done when you live in a sealed structure that is completely underground. Episode 3 does an excellent job of giving us more information about who the mechanic dangling at the end of this rope is, and introducing the politics of her world. As far as we can tell, becoming sheriff isn't that much different than going into the water, but it might be running in the direction of finding answers about what happened to George. I didn't mention it at the end of my last video, but the closing shot was an effective way to establish how someone who was born in the silo experiences things. Juliette is terrified of this water because she's never experienced anything like it. We don't know how long they've been there exactly, but it's at least 140 years, which means multiple generations have lived without ever seeing a body of water or anything else on the surface. I did mention that everyone sort of operates as if theirs is the most important job in the silo, and this episode really drove that idea home. When Shirley comes to wake her up because Jules' hangover has her still in bed, the room starts to shake from the unstable generator. The immediate threat from this type of failure makes Jules' statement that hers is in fact the most important job in the silo have some credence. But as is often the case, and especially in this setting, everything is connected, so she can't just exist hyper-focusing on this machine in a vacuum. When she gets there to try to fix it, she gets upset seeing her apprentice trying to do her job. I should mention that everyone who works in the silo has one of these people they're assigned to train, which are called shadows. This is important because it's one thing to punch a coworker, which we see Jules do here. But this is much more abusive given the fact that his future employment and essentially his quality of life is dependent on this relationship. Two things are established in this sequence and the one that follows where she's talking to her boss Knox. Jules has some issues beyond her obvious grief related to George's death. She is a character with flaws, and I'm not overlooking this in relation to what she does to Cooper, but the way she's protective of the generator ties into the title of the episode. In some ways, she's a person that prefers machines over people, which is an idea that we'll come back to. While this is all happening, Mayor Jahns and Deputy Marnes start their trip to the Down Deep, and we see them stop in front of Judicial for a drink of water. As they're talking, the deputy points out that this is more about being seen by the people who are standing outside. This helps to establish the politics between the different factions that hold power. When they make it to IT, they do stop in to visit Bernard, the head of that department, who we met as Allison's boss in the first episode. From what we've seen, the role of IT is still somewhat mysterious, but in relation to the internal politics of the silo, you get the sense that they're important. The mayor brings him a gift of brandy to try to curry some favor in relation to naming the next sheriff, and he mentions running the numbers in relation to Holston's replacement. Judicial has its own candidate that they want to put into the position, and when the mayor mentions Holston's pick of Juliette, Bernard calls her a thief. He accuses her of stealing 4 boxes of H57 tape that were reserved for IT, which he says they used to prevent their servers from cooking. The details surrounding this seem like they might be important, otherwise it seems a little bit petty, but he emphasizes that it doesn't matter what she took, it just matters that she stole, and in his opinion, that disqualifies her. The mayor doesn't like the idea of having Judicial's pick shoved down her throat, and it doesn't look like she appreciates Bernard's advice to leave walking the silo to kids with nothing better to do. Both Bernard and later Sims bring up the idea she needs to push through their pick to maintain the order of things. They emphasize that time is of the essence because the frightened citizens have begun to arm themselves, which we saw a little bit of in the previous episode. The other stop they make is to see Juliette's dad, Dr. Pete Nichols, in the maternity ward. We learn that they haven't been in touch for a while, that she was not born in the Down Deep, she was actually born in the Mids, and that her moving to mechanical was a choice she made when she was 13 years old. He doesn't get into details about what happened, but mentions a loss like that, and that she showed real interest in machines from an early age. The whole encounter is a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit hard to read, and Jahns just comes out and says that it brings up more questions than answers. But for us, it adds a lot of context for the decisions that we see Jules make. I think the most important thing he says is that he thought it felt good for her to be able to fix something. The idea of being able to figure out how something works, like the watch she got from George or the generator, and to fix them if they didn't. You can see how that was imprinted from this event in her past, and how that ties in with the idea of her preferring machines over people. When Jahns and Marnes make it to the 144th level, they're surprised to experience that same shaking effect from the generator. Whatever Jules has been doing to fix it is failing, and watching her work impresses the mayor enough that she decides to go visit her old friend Walker to ask about her. Walker isn't surprised to see that the mayor is in the Down Deep because she can hear what's going on with her illegal radio. Jahns looks the other way on that because they have this relationship, but the idea that some tech is prohibited for the population is something to keep in mind. You don't get to see what she tells her, but when Jahns comes back to offer Jules the job, she tells her that she's the only other person in the silo who wants her to be sheriff. Without much thought, she declines because she can't imagine that anyone can be trusted to do her job. Though after they leave, Deputy Hank notices something is carved on the back of Holston's badge. And you don't get to see what it says, but you realize that this is the sign he told Jules to look for. That makes her decide to agree to take the job under one condition. She needs to fix the generator first, and in order to do that, they have to shut it down. Earlier, Knox dismissed this idea because it's basically never happened, and Jahns brings up the same thing, but her concerns are mostly because it will leave people in the dark. Still, they agree, and then we find out when Mechanical meets that they're not even sure if what Juliette wants to do is possible. I won't get into the specifics other than to say this is a version of a steam turbine, and it might seem strange that Shirley says no one knows where the steam comes from. But keep in mind that asking questions about things you don't understand can get you sent outside to clean. It goes back to perspective and how you just accept some things as truths if they're presented to you that way. Steam comes from the ground, and there is a safety built into the system that will allow them to close the valve to stop the generator. This will only afford them a small window of time to complete the repairs, and that sets up a very tense and thrilling situation to watch. Knox and the others discuss how hard this is going to be to pull off and the stakes involved, and I think that it's an interesting setup because Jules isn't wrong. For as long as she's been working on it, the generator has continued to get worse, and it does need to be fixed. But this is only happening this way right now because she told them what needed to be done, while leaving out that she didn't really know how to do it. It draws attention to the fact that she has two clear motivations: to keep the generator running and to figure out what happened to George. Beyond that, the details, the politics, the people around her, all of these things sort of take a back seat. Things go wrong when the temperature increases faster than expected. This leads to Jules leaving Cooper behind to do the job while she comes up with a dangerous plan that might cool things down long enough for them to finish. She uses a hose to spray the main valve, which works, but it also means she has to confront her fear of water when she almost drowns. Her shadow is able to get the repaired blade back in place in time. They're able to get her back out of the water. Knox is able to vent the valve, and the generator fires up, so they did fix it. The lights come back on, and everyone in Mechanical breaks out in a celebration. In the middle of that, Jules's look changes from excitement to an empty stare, which sets her apart from this family that she's built up around herself in the Down Deep, and it's a reflection of the fact that she's going to be leaving them behind. She stops to apologize to Walker on the way out. She freaked out on her a little bit before and threw it in her face that she never leaves that apartment/workshop that she's in. They do make up, and she leaves George's camcorder with her, asking her to try to figure out what it is. As she leaves, Walker tells her not to end up like he did. He died looking for answers. And then before she starts to climb the stairs, she flips over the badge so we can see what Holston carved in it. When they were arguing in George's hiding place, he said the job of the sheriff was to maintain order, while she said it was to find the truth. And that's what he put on the back of the badge that he wanted her to have. Throughout their trip, we'd had hints that Jahns and Marnes had feelings that went beyond their professional relationship. And on the way back up, we see them express those to each other and even share a kiss. We also saw that Bernard was angry with her decision to make Juliette sheriff, but when she gets back to her office, she does make that official and tells Marnes to grab a bottle of wine and get ready to go to her apartment. She never makes it though, because you could see that there was something going on with her when she was signing the papers. She wasn't feeling well, and when she goes to the bathroom, she collapses on the floor. There's something coming out of her mouth. It almost looks like she was frothing. Marnes is able to break down the door to see what happened, but the episode ends there. I thought this was another strong episode, and as someone who read the book, I liked seeing the choices they made to develop the characters. There's a very concentrated effort that you can see if you know where they end up, and it should be fun for people to put that all together later. Because this is one of those stories that reveals things in a way that's like peeling off layers. As far as changes, the whole shutting down of the generator scene was completely different. In the book, it just sort of happens, there's not much fanfare, and they move on. What they went with works a lot better for TV, because otherwise it would just be Jules planning things out, and this was, edge of your seat, can't wait to see what happened, and it provided more information about what kind of character she is. Judicial is also something that they've added, or I guess expanded on from the books. There are at least a couple of mentions of judges, but none of these agents are out in the silo doing things for their political influence. Without giving away any spoilers, I think I know what they're doing here. It doesn't seem like a bad idea. I don't think it really changes much, so we'll see how it plays out. Something that did feel like a surprise, if not a big change, was the way the screen in the cafeteria glitched when they turned the power off, and it showed the lush landscape that Allison discovered on George's computer. As mentioned, they do shut the generator down in the book, but I don't think there was much made about it being completely dark, and this particular scene does not happen. I went looking online to see what people were saying because, I know what's going to happen and I know what's going on outside and everything else. So I figured this would probably catch people's attention. And then I was a little surprised because when I watched the scene, I read it as everyone there that was sitting in the cafeteria was worried about the lights going off. And I didn't see any reaction to what flashed on the screen at all. Like, I thought it was mostly for us. And it didn't really affect what was happening with the characters in that moment. Reading other people's reaction, it seemed like they thought that some of those people did notice and that might lead somewhere. I'll just say if that's what the show was going for, I think they could have done a better job of making it clear. Either way, the most popular theory is that it was a flash of what the outside really looks like, which I also saw a good counter argument for from people who are just watching the show and haven't read the book, about how the fact that it's daytime is suspicious. Because obviously they turned the power off at night when people would be sleeping so that it would cause less of a disruption for that 8 hours. It might not be super clear yet, but Holston did say that he would go through the cafeteria before dawn and after dark so he didn't have to see Allison's body on the screen when he went through there. So they do see time outside reflecting their day and night cycles inside. There's also some debate about the bodies not being there in the sunny image, but Holston didn't see them through his visor when he was out there cleaning either, so I'm not sure why people find that surprising. There's a possibility that this is hinting that the show will go in a different direction than the book did, at least as far as the way it reveals some things, because this is a choice that they decided to make, but I guess I'm not that convinced at this point, so we'll have to wait and see. As I said last week, most of the changes seem like improvements. Maybe the one exception is judicial, but I feel like that's more of a neutral change rather than something that makes things worse. I think we see some payoff from adding the scenes with Holston and Jules already. It makes you wonder what he was doing before he went outside and what he might have left behind for her. I thought Will Patton and Geraldine James did a great job of selling the romance between Marnes and Jahns, which gave what happened to her some weight. It definitely makes the character of the deputy more compelling and makes his reaction to what happened matter. It's also great how when you see Tim Robbins in the first episode, you think they wouldn't have hired this guy for an insignificant role, but then he just sort of fades into the background for a while. The smile he delivers at the end of his conversation with Jahns was a masterclass in how to say one thing with your expression while conveying something totally different with your presence. And it was cool to see Ian Glenn, aka Sir Jorah, in something new. And I'm not sure how much I love his accent, or Rebecca Ferguson's for that matter, but it's still interesting because they're obviously asking these actors to adopt an American accent, which is a choice. Things are looking good. The mysteries are there. Did George commit suicide? What happened to Mayor Jahns? What made Jules leave home at 13 to work in the Down Deep? And of course, what's going on with the silo anyways? I think that seems like a pretty good place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.